Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. My guy, Andrew DiCecco, is here. We'll look at the matchups that he's looking at for this game, Eagles and Cowboys. We know how important this thing is. Sunday Night Football down in Big D. They have won 14 straight games down there. And Philadelphia, of course, is in first place. But if they lose the game, both teams would be 10-3. And then the Final Four would really tell us who would be the 1 or 2 seed or the 5 seed. That's what's at stake when they play on Sunday Night Football. Andrew DiCecco from InsideTheBirds.com is here, and he joins me now for Football at 4. Andrew, what's up, buddy?
Hey, Mike, doing well. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man, and it's another Eagles-Cowboys game. They played a couple of weeks ago. Philly wins that game, but they won that game because Dallas lacked a lot of attention to detail. There were drops. There was the step out of bounds. There's the play where, Ferguson runs short of the goal line. In your mind, has Dallas improved and got better? Have they learned from that loss?
Yeah, I think so, especially when you see how the offense is operating. Dak Prescott, the attention to detail, his ability to elevate their offense, get other players involved aside from CeeDee Lamb, who had 191 receiving yards the last time he played the Eagles, including Jake Ferguson, who also had a big day against the Eagles, 91 yards. But he's involving other players, namely Brandon Cooks, who really was a non-factor the last time these two teams played. And it sort of created a new dimension to their offense. He's someone that can stretch the field. CD can work the short to intermediate and be a deep threat. Their running game wasn't really effective here, but I think that Tony Pollard's shown some burst late in the season. So the whole offense is really operating on all cylinders here. So I think you have to give a lot of credit to them learning and correcting and taking some attention to detail there.
Yeah, and then, Andrew, on the flip side, I mean, what have you seen from Philadelphia since that game at home? They have won the game, the Kansas. They had a bye, then they had the Kansas City game, Buffalo game, and then, of course, last week San Francisco, which we haven't talked to you since then. Does Philadelphia feel like a team that the arrow is kind of pointing down, or do you look at that more of a 1 week, hey, it was kind of in a rough spot, they had a lot of emotion, the short week for them, long week for San Francisco, are we finding out more and more that Philadelphia is starting to get figured out more by teams?
Yeah, well, they were really trending in that direction, right? They were winning some narrow contests, having to come back late in games, and Jalen Hurts pulling off these late game heroics. Josh Sweat was a big time player down the stretch into some of these wins here, but you can only eventually the law of averages tells you that you can only win in that manner so often before it catches up to you. And sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, losing's never a good thing, but losing in that manner almost enables you to take a step back and hit that reset button and figure out, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. What do we need to be doing? What are we doing that's not successful? What do we need to start adding into the game plans? What do we need to start taking away? How can we get out to a faster start? How can we sustain that in the second quarter? You just have to sort of reconfigure your whole approach. And I think sometimes when you're winning, there's not necessarily a cause for concern or a reason to really mess with that recipe. But now, losing in that fashion as they did in one of the worst losses that I think it probably was the worst loss in the Nick Sirianni era, I think that you have to make some changes there.
All right, so let's take a look at that. You wrote about it over at InsideTheBirds.com after the game. The Niners' weapons, too much for the Eagles' defense. If you're Dallas, what personnel do you have that you would say, San Francisco did this, we could try it too?
Well, right off the bat, Jake Ferguson, who had 91 yards on 7 catches in the first matchup. Well, how about trying to exploit an undermanned second level, which is adding a new linebacker in Shaq Leonard this week in all likelihood. But Morrow is likely going to be the starter, just given his experience in the system. And, I mean, there's just not a whole lot there. Zach Cunningham is maybe coming back from a hamstring injury. We don't know yet, but all signs are pointing that he probably will. But, look, Dallas is going to test that intermediate level of the field until the Eagles prove that they can stop it. You saw what the Niners were able to do with George Kittle. I thought that he was able to do more damage than the 68 yards that he had. They didn't really need him to. CeeDee Lamb's obviously going to attack the nickel spot. The nickel spot's been a sore spot for the Eagles all season. Even getting Bradley Roby, I thought he had a really shaky game, to put it mildly, against the 49ers. Missed an open field tackle blatantly on Brock Purdy, and just really hasn't been aggressive at getting after the football and trailing in pursuit of too many players. And Eli Ricks has been victimized. He was victimized mightily against the 49ers. He was only on the field for 5 snaps and surrendered 3 catches for 44 yards and a touchdown, all to Jawan Jennings. So that's all on tape. You saw the first matchup, and I would expect the Cowboys to try and attack them much the same way.
All right, I want to get your thoughts now because the Eagles' defense, as you kind of just chronicled, there's things that Dallas can do. There's places they could find here. Where's a spot that you like the matchup for Philly's defense that they can try to exploit?
Defensively, I think that there's going to be opportunities to get after the quarterback, right? Dak Prescott was sacked 5 times in the last matchup, but you would like to see that not necessarily late in games. You want to see that early on where the Eagles can sort of build off of that momentum and establish a rhythm defensively. And sometimes you have a team like Dallas, which seems to be always fragile-minded, I would say. Sometimes one mistake or one miscue can alter the course of their direction for the game. And if you can get to Dak early and force maybe a turnover there, the Eagles can get out to an early lead, and they haven't had a lot of success down there. But I think that if you're able to get out to a start like that, get Josh Sweat coming off the edge there, get Hassan Reddick back in there. Those guys are playing a ton of snaps, by the way.
Yes.
So that's something to keep an eye on as well as we get further down the stretch. But that's where I think that they can have an advantage.
Yeah, that's something we discussed earlier. Is are they playing Andrew a lot of snaps out of necessity? Like, you know, they just don't like the other options to spell them.
Yes, exactly. And if you look at the roster right now, one of the most glaring holes, Mike, to me at least, is the lack of a 4th pass rusher. I mean, that's a glaring absence, especially as you log a ton of miles and you get further into the season and you need to have somewhat fresh legs. That's not really no one has fresh legs late in the season, but you want to be able to have some sort of a burst. And they only have 2 front-end pass rushers. They're trying to limit the snaps for Brandon Graham. And then after that, there's just Nolan Smith. And Nolan Smith, they're still reluctant to put him onto the field. So they're having to put Hassan and Josh out there probably more than they would like. So maybe they need to address that in the offseason, draft the pass rusher on day 1 or day 2 and try and get that figured out. But that's something to keep an eye on because they've been able to hang their hat for years on their pass rush, but they're asking a lot of those 2 players. And I think that you may even have to see maybe Milton Williams kick out wide and provide some snaps off the edge, but they have to do something because that's going to be a problem later as we move along.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4 from the InsideTheBirds.com and Inside the Birds podcast. Yeah, they. I saw some alignments. They had Brandon Graham line up on the nose, some stunning around there. I mean, it looks like they're trying to get creative with what they have, especially in that game last week against San Francisco. You mentioned the linebackers. Do you anticipate? We talked about this when they got Byard. How much will Byard play? Well, he just got traded. We'll see. He played about the whole game. You do the snap counts. You post them on your X handle after every game. How many snaps do you anticipate for Shaq Leonard and what kind of role?
I would say probably about 20 to 25. I mean, this isn't someone who's rolling off the couch and they're asking him to step in there. So I don't think maybe even 30 snaps. Given that a necessity, they need him. And I don't know what the situation will be for Zach Cunningham. Obviously, if he's not able to go, well, then that would, by default, leave Shaq Leonard as a starter. Obviously, Nicholas Morrow with Ben Van Sumer, the rookie undrafted linebacker, as the 3rd linebacker once again for a 2nd consecutive week. But I think 25 or 30 is reasonable. You're getting a veteran player who is getting a crash course in the system this week. He's someone who's familiar with playing in different systems. So I think that you're going to different coaches. So he's going to be able to adapt, I would imagine. You're going to have a lot of veterans there that are going to be able to kind of plug him in and show him what he needs to do. Nicholas Morrow, obviously he had a really tough game last week, but let's not take away from the fact that he's a really smart player. That's why he took the green dot in week 2 after coming on being on the practice squad. So he's someone that if you're playing alongside him, he's going to be able to help get you right and get you lined up. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
All right, let's look at the Eagle offense, Andrew. So many questions there. Let's start with that. Give us your thoughts on where this offense is now after 12 weeks of the season. What do you see in terms of what this offense is and some of the positives, I guess, and negatives?
Well, they really don't have much of an identity right now. I think if you had to lean on something, you would say their ability to manufacture yards with a quick A.J. Brown slant, which you saw early in the game. For some reason, they got away from it. If they can pick up yards like that at any given time, you need 10 yards. Devonte Smith can break free and catch that. Jalen can throw it. You should be getting Dallas Goedert back. That's going to completely take away some of the stress that's been put on A.J. Brown, which he's been relatively quiet the past few weeks. So I think their passing game is something that should continue to move along. The running game, to me, is where it's kind of perplexing. They haven't run the ball particularly well for a while now. I think even last week they had like 22 yards on 9 carries or something like that. The last time they played Dallas, they collectively averaged about a little over 3 yards a carry. They're just not generating a lot of push at the point of attack, and then the runners themselves need to have the vision to be able to see it and hit the hole and take off, and not really you have to be more decisive. So it's a collective effort there, but I think they need to get on track and try and get the running game established early to kind of drain the clock and keep that Dallas offense, which is really starting to hit their stride, keep them on the sideline as much as possible.
Yeah, I know a lot of people talk about the running game or lack thereof. They only ran it 6 times with running backs, 7 times Hurts, so they had 13 carries last week. But there's been this whole thing. Well, they didn't run. When they did run, they didn't run very well. So what's going on in your mind in the running game, and should that be able to get going against this Dallas team?
Well, I mean, some of the players that don't usually get beat up front are getting beat up front. It was earlier in the season, you could point to Cam Jurgens and him not being there, because when he was in there, the running game was vastly improved. But they don't have a power running back. You saw them put Kenny Gainwell in, trying to establish that as last week, and I think sometimes when you have too many players that are too similar, they're easier to defend. But I think you can do a lot more with DeAndre Swift, and I think the Eagles need to find ways to get him in space more, do some creative things with him as a route runner, because he can offer so much more, I think, than what he's being asked to do right now. But I think it's just more they're losing the battle in the trenches, and that's something that you and I haven't talked about much with the Eagles over the past few years that we've been doing this, because they've been dominant in the trenches. So this is very uncharacteristic, but it's just an amalgam of things that aren't going right. It's hard to pinpoint one thing there.
Well, that's interesting you said that. I brought this up on Tuesday's show. I said, are part of the reason why they're struggling in the run game, is it because of the offense? It's almost like we don't want to acknowledge that the line could have a role in this. Yeah,
I mean, and that they are definitely they have a hand in it. You saw it last week. I mean, early on, the Eagles dominated the trenches in that game, and then the 49ers adjusted, and they dominated on both fronts. So, and that wasn't just one game that we can look at. I thought that there were instances over the past 3-4 games where the Eagles' offensive line has not looked like the offensive line that we've grown to know. So that's something to keep an eye on. You have a lot of older players on that line. So, I mean, look, teams are looking to find ways to attack the Eagles, and they're finding success going after the trenches, which, like I said, very uncharacteristic of the Eagles.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4 from InsideTheBirds.com. What does getting Goedert back mean to this offense?
It means everything. Dallas Goedert is not only a intermediary option, but he's someone that can stretch the seam, can get vertical and stretch the seams. He can move around formations. He's a red zone presence, and he allows teams to – they're not able to have surveillance primarily on A.J. and Devonte. They have to account for him as well. They have to respect the mid-range game, which I don't think they really did when you had Jack Stoll and Grant Calcaterra, and you were relying on Julio and Olamide Zaccheaus and players of that like to sort of compensate for the loss of Goedert. But I mean, Dallas Goedert's an elite tight end, and he can line up from alignment. He can align from a multitude of places on the field, and like I said, a red zone weapon, which I think when you saw them sputter in the red zone last week, that screamed to me that was like Dallas Goedert territory, and they just didn't have it. And there were certain instances last week where I thought Jack Stoll was open and Albert Okwuegbunam was open, and it didn't seem like Hurts was overly thrilled with pulling the trigger and a little hesitant there, and that may have had to do with continuity, but also just he doesn't have a lot of reps thrown to those guys in game situations. So I think that's going to be vastly improved as we move forward this week with Dallas Goedert.
All right, Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4 here. By the way, the fact that you just flawlessly gave us Albert O's name was probably the most impressive part of this conversation so far. That was a great job out of you there. All right, let me get your thoughts in the game then itself, the matchup that you like in terms of, hey, Philadelphia will win because I like this matchup, or Dallas will win because of this particular matchup.
Well, I like the Eagles matchup on Deron Bland, believe it or not, and I think that Devonte Smith should be able to have a good game against him, and Bland is sort of reeling a little bit coming off of last week. He was picked on quite a bit in the Thursday night game, and Devonte is a technician as a route runner, and he keeps corners guessing and keeps them on their toes. And when you have someone like that who has such a sudden stop-start ability, is effortless in his change of direction, and can beat you. He's a 3-level threat, so he can beat you anywhere on the field. I think that's someone to keep an eye on. I think this could be a big Devonte Smith week. For the Eagles, the pass coverage is the area where you might look at it and have some concern. I wonder how they're going to assign coverage to CeeDee Lamb. Darius Slay, to me, would be the option, but he doesn't line up in the slot. He doesn't play the slot. I almost wonder if you ask James Bradbury to do that, you put Eli Ricks / Josh Jobe on the outside and go that way, but you cannot. I don't know if lining him up on Bradley Roby or Eli Ricks in the slot is going to be a remedy for trying to contain CeeDee Lamb. It could be another big game. It probably will be another big game for CeeDee Lamb. So you have to make sure that other guys aren't beating you like Brandon Cooks down the field and Jake Ferguson in the short to intermediary areas of the field.
All right, it's a very important game for both these teams. Philadelphia wins. They have a 2-game lead in the division with 4 to play. If Dallas wins, they are tied with 4 to go. And then, of course, the last 4 games will really shape who wins that division. It's Sunday Night Football, and it's right here on 97.3 ESPN. That's Andrew DiCecco. And, of course, this is Football at 4. And, Andrew, we always appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you again next week, pal.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.